Welcome again to guest speaker surprise. Um, Today I have with me really two distinguished guests, but one we're going to focus on for the moment, as you'll meet in a second. Um, we've been, or we're starting to look at the question of proofs for the existence of God, but I wanted to look at it from a different angle, from a scientific angle. In other words, not just what is it, where is there proof for the existence of God, but from a scientific standpoint, what constitutes proof for something, so that we can decide whether or not we're sort of meeting the standard uh, of proof from a scientific angle, or at least from a general angle of how we know that we can trust that something is a true statement. So without further ado, I would like to introduce my special guest.
Yes. It's very good to be with you today, students, talking to you about truth and proof and science. The thing that comes to mind when I think of these things is the laws of the universe, most notably the law of gravity. We all know gravity exists, but can anyone really explain how it works? And so that's the difference between a law and a theory in science. We know the laws, but the theories are always being improved. Evolution, we can see that it happens, but do we know how? The central dogma of biology, that DNA is replicated. Do we know exactly how all of that happens? How the mutations occur? How all the intricacies play out? So a lot of times in science, we know what happens, we can see what happens, but explaining why or how is the task of the centuries, right? It takes forever for us to figure that out. And so where this happens practically are in journals, right? If you ever go and do research for somebody, you will spend most of your time writing journal articles trying to prove that you have an explanation that is worth its weight in salt, right? You have an explanation for something that no one's found an explanation for before. And in science, this happens through instrumentation and through data, right? You want to show, you basically want to connect two dots, right? And you're taking some big problem, you narrow it down to basically two dots, right? One very simple problem, and you try and give an explanation based on data and try and prove it that way. But it's important to see how science may know a lot, but can it really explain it? That's why there's thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of journals written each year, and that's why most universities, what they really care about is people writing journal articles, right? Trying to explain things that we supposedly already know. So it's interesting to think about that because society obviously thinks that science is the most conclusive thing there is out there. But, I mean, how many times are you hearing about drugs or medicines, right, that go bad or have unintended side effects or need to be pulled off the shelves, or even, the Galaxy 7 that needs to be pulled off the shelf because the lithium batteries are exploding in people's pockets, right? We think we may know, but a lot of times we don't know everything. And so explanation can always occur. More explanation can always occur. And so I think, yeah.
Well, just out of curiosity, so as we're talking about proofs here, what maybe we wouldn't use that word in science, but what constitutes? I mean, we wouldn't say simply the theory of evolution too much anymore. We might, I mean, in certain circumstances, you might say, but you would say we recognize that there's truth in that.
Mm-hmm.
How at what point do you say that something is more than, say, just a hypothesis? In other words, I guess I'm trying to get more at.
Well, even gravity.
Right.
There's gravity we know exists, right? You say evolution, we know evolution happens. But explaining how, or like for instance, we still don't have a theory of gravity that is, solid and explains everything.
So it's what essentially works in the current level. Like what is most successful in terms of explaining something. It's not that
Yeah,
we
something that connects
prove it. It's just that it's
a lot of the dots, but right. Or like mass, something like matter. What makes up matter and mass, right? We still don't have a complete theory of why, of how matter is matter and why mass is mass and that kind of thing. There's competing theories, but we know that matter exists. We know a lot about it, but we don't know everything, And I think I pretty much seems like you could pick any topic and it would be like that light,
So would you say, and if you want to jump in here, Mr. Morris, would you like to jump? Hi, it's Mr. Is there a certain leap of, I mean, I don't want to use this term because it seems a little loaded, but a leap of faith in terms of even a theory or a paradigm that you have to kind of sort of buy into it, even though it doesn't necessarily explain everything, just to test it out
Well, in science, your job in science is to continually test things uh, to find the truth of it, right? To find exactly what's going on. Unfortunately, in a lot of things, we're limited with what tools, what instruments we can use. But just to go off of Mr. Sternberg's the discussion on law versus theory, a law is a law only because it happens every time we test it. The same way, it happens every time. A theory is trying to explain why that happens, right? And unfortunately, theories aren't truth. Theories are best guess with the information we have in front of us. So even though we have all these theories that even you yourself just said, we don't really call it the theory of evolution. Well, yeah, we do. We do call it the theory of evolution because we don't really know exactly how that happens over generations. We know that it happens, but we're only guessing what happens over millions of years of that type of...
based on evidence that you see there, you try to...
Based on the best evidence that we have, right? But at the end of the day, there is always a leap of faith. You're taking your best evidence and you're making a guess on what's happening there in science. Now, you hope that you did a good job of setting up your experimentation to prove it, but then other minds will get a hold of it and rip it apart,
Mm-hmm.
which is what it's all about. Is it reproducible? Does it happen time and time and time again? If it does, then it becomes a law of nature. But there are plenty of laws we can't explain, like gravity or my favorite is I can't even think of it now. Well, it's not that one's not my favorite, but law of conservation of matter. We know it happens, but we don't know why it happens or how it happens.
What is that, just for the layman?
Well, that when you move matter to some other matter, you never lose anything. What goes in must come out in some form or another. Why is that? Why does that happen in nature? We can't really explain why that happens. We just know that it happens. Theory. When I was in school about the atomic theory, what's happening inside an atom is totally different now, based on new evidence that we've been able to see.
Why isn't there, this is just a side question, why isn't there as much kind of humility on that front, do you think? I mean, obviously, when, say, for instance, a religious institution does something, makes some error, does something bad, you go, look what you did. But that's that kind of same attitude. Well, gosh, what we thought 100 years ago is kind of laughable. But you don't really necessarily see that kind of recognition when it comes.
Yeah,
maybe it's seen as building upon one after the other. You're not really making mistakes so much as you're sort of building and building.
Well, and in those aspects, it's kind of cyclical. I mean, mankind is constantly going back and making those same mistakes. Throughout history, when it comes to not scientific things, but non-scientific things, we continually make the same mistakes over and over and over again, which is an interesting
Yeah.
concept of history.
Well, great. Is there anything either of you would like to conclude with today?
The only thing I would say is you always have to look at the data. Whoever is presenting something to you, don't just take it for word. Look at the data yourself and investigate whether or not you believe in it with all your heart, with all your soul, with all the information that you're given.
And with all that you don't quite know yet.
Correct.
You know, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had teachers who would tell me in chemistry when you hear someone presenting something, your job is to just really tear them apart.
Right, to doubt.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I mean, that's sort of the method of science, is to doubt everything until you're given a reason to believe it.
That's a great place to end, because I want to thank my guests today for their insights and their kind of humility in expressing kind of what they do, but also the limitations. We're going to take a look now at the meaning of the term proof, and it's interesting. Mr. Sternberg ended with the scrutiny, because the term to prove something, to put it to the test, is that tearing it apart. Like, that's what shows whether something should be believed or not. So thanks again to them.